It's wonderful to be here as we celebrate 25 years of Boston College, Ireland, and the wealth of scholarship, engagement, collaboration represented by 4 colleagues to my left up here, but so many in the room and beyond. Over many decades, really going back to the 1940s, when what has become the Burns Library began collecting in the area of Irish literature and a range of kind of materials related to Irish history, Boston College has emerged as one of the world's great centers for study and sustained reflection on the contributions of Ireland, the Irish people, the Irish diaspora, and we have 4 of the most distinguished colleagues already before us, so I will make my remarks brief as we move forward. As we talked over the last few years about how we could commemorate the 25th anniversary of the creation of Boston College, Ireland, on St. Stephen's Green, a real testament to that kind of late 20th century optimism about the aftermath of the Good Friday Accords, the emergence of a new Ireland on the world stage. Actually, this house, which opened in a renovated status in the summer of 1998, the summer that I moved to Boston College to take up my faculty position in the history department. Irish studies at that point had been around for 20 years, but the 97-98 academic year saw a thorough restoration of this building, which continues to be such a hub for the community that is gathered here today and so many other intellectual communities on campus and across the Boston area. The Burns Library kind of formalized its relationship to all things Ireland in 1986 when the library received its naming gift at that point in time. Irish Studies as an academic program dates back to 1978. But it was really in the mid to late 1990s that it brought together great strength in both the English history department and partners across campus. And the opportunity presented itself to acquire the property at the heart of Dublin, but really to think about how to engage with a set of higher education, academic, governmental, civil society partners in ways that I don't think the founders could have imagined 25 years ago. We had the great good fortune to hire as the academic director 20 years ago, Mike Cronin, who will be one of the speakers here this afternoon. But over the years, the strength that we've built and the reputation we've been able to build both in the Republic and in the North has really advanced Boston College's presence as a critical and trusted partner at this important moment in Ireland's history, but also for us on the Boston College campus. BC Ireland has emerged as a great gateway to Europe and to think differently, think more imaginatively about our international commitments, friendships, partnerships over time. This afternoon, again, we will hear about Boston College, Ireland. We'll hear about Irish Studies, the kind of academic center that has sustained so much of this conversation over the years. We have Guy Biner, who raced back from Oxford, Mississippi by way of Memphis, Tennessee, within a few minutes of missing this afternoon's presentation. We have Christian DuPont, who does such wonderful work in partnering with colleagues across campus, but especially in the cultural space across Ireland, in the South and in the North, to think about how we sustain and strengthen the collections in the Burns Library. And the newest member of the Irish leadership team here on campus, the director of the Irish Institute over the past year, and professor of political science, Mary Murphy, native of Waterford, Ireland, where we are blessed to have the mayor and other civic leaders of Waterford with us here this afternoon. First time for several of our Irish visitors, first time being with us here in Boston. So a warm Boston College welcome to all of you for being with us this afternoon. Now I'm very much looking forward to sitting in the front row and learning what I need to know about one of my favorite places in the world here, a quarter of the way into the 21st century. Without any further ado, let me turn it over to Rachael Young here from the Irish Studies program, who will serve as our very adept moderator.
Hey everyone, I'd just like to point out that sitting in the front row, students, it's not that bad, it's not that scary. You can sit in the front row in future events. So I'd like to say, so happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. Welcome to Connolly. We're so happy that you came out on this kind of glum, hopefully spring weather incoming day, but thank you for making that trek to be here with us. So we're going to be marking the 25th anniversary of Boston College, Ireland. So for a quarter of a century now, our building on St. Stephen's Green has served as the community for BC students and alumni and faculty and friends visiting Ireland, but perhaps more importantly has provided this intellectual base for us BC academics to engage with Ireland and Irish studies. So tonight, this panel is going to discuss these sweeping changes that have occurred in Ireland in the past 25 years since we bought the building on St. Stephen's Green. It's going to analyze challenges and opportunities these developments have had on the study of Ireland, both in Ireland and here in the States. So I don't think I need to reintroduce our star-studded panel, but we will just go down the line. So I have Guy Binder, Sullivan Chair and Director of Irish Studies, Mike Cronin, Director of BC Ireland, Mary C. Murphy, Director of the Irish Institute, and Christian DuPont, Burns Librarian. For those of you who don't know, that is them in order from my left, your right. And so the first question, okay, I'm so sorry, the chairs are quite high. The first question I want to ask is primarily directed at Mike, but I'd really like everyone's opinion on how has Ireland changed since BC arrived in 2000?
Okay, welcome everybody, thank you. I think one thing we have to understand is the building was bought for many reasons, but one of the primary reasons the building was bought was to support the work that BC was doing as part of the post-conflict Northern Ireland process. The Irish Institute, which Mary now heads up, was funded by the US State Department for 16 years to run programs across the border in Ireland, but across communities, to bring people to Boston and the US for 10-day programs so they could actually get off the streets and talk and begin to heal. So that's the impetus. I think when you look back at 2000, there's various things you have to sort of consider how dramatically Ireland has changed in the last 25 years. A few random examples. If you look at the process that was underway in 1998 after the Good Friday Agreement, 2000 the buildings bought, at that point, although the Good Friday Agreement was working, the decommissioning of paramilitary weapons had not happened. Okay? The peace process was very fragile. That's obviously moved on. You think about the way Ireland's population has changed. In 2004, less than 1% of the Irish population was non-Irish born. So Ireland was uniformly white and Irish. You fast forward to now, in the Republic, the non-Irish population is up towards 18 and 19%. It's a dramatic change in how Ireland looks, how it talks about itself, who the Irish are. 2000 when the building was bought, social media, happy days, did not exist. When you think about that, Space Station was one of the first big ones in 2004. That's a two-way conversation, and now you have, Irish dancers from the Connemara Gaeltacht going viral around the world through the means and the power of social media. There's lots of content, lots of conversations that Ireland has with its world is through social media. Where are most social media companies headquartered? So the great boom of the Irish economy in Ireland. So all these kind of changes have been quite dramatic. The way the look of Ireland has changed, its place in the world has changed, what it means to be Irish has shifted. So economics, politics, technology, people, it's all moved along very, very quickly in 2.5 decades.
You're all looking at me.
The right person for that.
Well, when Rachel posed this question, the one thing that I thought of was, where was I in 2000, 25 years ago? And I was a PhD student in Queen's University in Belfast in 2000. And back in 2000, it was just 2 years after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. Belfast was still a very militarised city. And although the conflict had ended, the violent conflict had ended, there were still very strong remnants of that in place in Belfast at the time. And when I look at Belfast today, it's a radically different place to what it was back in 2000. And that's a real testament to the peace process. But it also speaks to the role that Boston College played. Because as the provost alluded to it, Boston College, in the period around 1998 in particular, became a place and a space where difficult conversations could be had between politicians who didn't typically speak to each other, at least not in public anyway. So Boston College played a very important role in all of that. And hopefully through the work of the Irish Institute going forward, we'll recognise and acknowledge that Northern Ireland has changed, that it faces new challenges, many of them similar to the challenges faced in the Republic of Ireland. And Boston College will become a space where we can think about those issues and challenges and problems, and use our faculty here, use the Irish American community here, and work across the disciplines as well to have some of those important conversations. And they link very much with what's happening in the United States today as well, in terms of those policy challenges that the United States is facing. So there's an awful lot, as Mike has said, has changed in that 25 years. But I think for me, in terms of where I was in 2000, the peace process and the way in which the island of Ireland has changed so dramatically in that period is maybe the most pronounced way in which I understand the last 25 years. Sorry, Walter.
All right, we'll go this way. I think I won't comment so much on what I see as changed, but maybe with my comments, a couple of themes that we might come back to, or that I'd like to come back to, because I think about them a lot, and they can defining a society and maybe a metric where we can measure change. And those are family and place. Okay? Family and place. So let me come to that. So I'm one of the non-Irish here. Okay, my father was born in France and emigrated to the U.S. where I was born. And my mother was born here of Greek heritage, so that makes me, never mind. Okay, I've married an Italian since, so I think a lot about, resonances of culture, and then also observing family structures and how societies have evolved through them. So I think that's what, as I reflect on what is it about Irish society, and your comments, Mike did, many of you there, a wonderful lunchtime program thinking about how is it that this small island, this small population has such, cultural and this global influence. And it's the people at the heart of that, right? So what makes Irish people? I think that's a question I've asked myself as I've gotten to know many people from across the island and understand the generations of their family and what the island of Ireland means to them, whether they live on the island or have never seen the island but claim it as home. It's very powerful. So I think that's a metric. And so what has changed? Has that changed? Because there are a lot of things that tear at our families. I think this is where I always look at it as a comparative US perspective, right? What are the things that are ripping us apart? But why don't they rip apart the Irish family or senses quite as much? But in some cases they have, right? And that's the threat, is to see. So, and we're affected by policies and our behavior towards one another. So government policies are one thing that affect the structures of family and the relationship to the economy. It's a very important question to ask, how do you define a society? Because what does the individual expect of the government versus their family member, versus their county or their clan? And I think Irish people may give different answers to those questions than some of the rest of us would. So that might be a metric to see about what's changed or what's not. So, Guy?
I was also a student in 2000, a doctoral student. I was in Dublin, an international student. I'm not from Ireland. And with that many international students, for example, then doing PhDs, that's changed. The internationalization of Irish studies in society has changed a lot. We've lost some of the greats who talk about culture. I remember going to see a concert of Sinead O'Gowan. I remember seeing a concert of Sinead O'Connor. Things we've lost so much over these 25 years. And a lot can be said about the changes, because Ireland has, to adopt another moment in Irish history of change, Ireland has changed utterly over those 25 years. But one thing I'll flag, which might not be that obvious, but is startling when you look at it. Ireland, already in 2000, it had changed a lot. It had gone through processes of secularization, and it changed in many ways. It was a traditional society which was on the cusp of rapid hyper-modernity in many ways. But in terms of politics, it's interesting. For years, Ireland was known, and I know this is more Mary's field than my own. I'm an historian and Mary is a political scientist. But for years, Ireland was known as a conservative country. And it's remarkable, Ireland has become the most progressive, in many ways, country in Europe. The fact that it's also a Central European country. In fact, Ireland today is the only country in the EU where English is a formal language. We think of the EU as having 3 official languages. Since Brexit, it's only Ireland, which is already interesting. And it's a beacon of progressiveness at a time when Europe is exactly turning the opposite direction. It's moving towards authoritarian politics and authoritarian populism. And that's remarkable. Nobody saw that happening in so many different ways, which is remarkable. When I think of the campaign to repeal the 8th, the making abortion legal in Ireland, same-sex marriages, all of these issues, which also put challenges, I think, for a Jesuit university, looking at engaging with what that means for Ireland, what it means for changing notions of Catholicism and engaging with the modern world. And Ireland has this remarkable role. It sees itself as a beacon of human rights in ways which weren't seen before. And that for me is startling, because it's not the Ireland that people imagine. People had a different way of seeing it. It just shows for me also as an historian, you never know how things will develop. And Ireland has a unique position now, both within Europe and within the world, way above the notion of a small country on the edge of Europe.
So So maybe one of the themes that we'll highlight about that's changed in Ireland over the past 25 years is immigration and emigration, right? And I'm going to kind of group maybe 3 of these questions rapid fire. I know all of you are used to being on the teaching side of the table, but I'm going to rapid fire some questions maybe. So one is about immigration. So how have changes in Irish immigration affected the U.S.-Irish relationship? Right? Mike talked a lot about this at lunch today for those of you who were there. I also though want to ask on the flip side, how have changes in Irish emigration affected the transatlantic relationship? And my follow-up to that would be, what role should BC play, right, in our dedication to Irish studies and our relationship with Ireland? What role do we play in this changing relationship, this changing social field of emigration and immigration in Ireland? It's a small question for you.
Just again, for people who are unfamiliar with it, my wife would have gone to, she's Irish, she would have gone to school in the 1980s, and the number of non-Irish born people in her classroom was exactly 0. My son is 16, and in his class of 28 people with 17 nationalities. So that is how Ireland's changed. And I think in terms of the Irish-American relationship, I find it quite interesting when you hit the summer and you get the big tourist numbers arriving to the US, and a lot of those people are older. They're Irish Americans, they're probably Catholic, they have an idea of an old Ireland. And they ask you questions. You know, last summer it was the Olympics, and one of the great kind of sprinters, very famous young woman in Ireland, is Irish born but of Nigerian parents. And these old Irish Americans will look at me, oh, and they'll sort of say, but how is she Irish? Well, she was born here. And I think there are levels of kind of mutual misunderstanding with a traditional Irish American community here, whose sense of Ireland almost ends with the Quiet Man, 1952. The Ireland is still Catholic green and all these things they want, and when they arrive in Dublin, it doesn't look like that anymore, and I think that's quite a challenge. I think that age thing is also important when you understand the Irish community in the US. Inward immigration to the US from Ireland, Mary was probably one of barely a couple of thousand last year. It stopped. It doesn't happen anymore. Which means with every generation, people who are actually self-defined Irish and can genuinely genealogically understand that gets further and further away. It's brilliant that Irish Americans can say, hey, I'm Irish. I don't know where or when, but I'm Irish. That's good for Ireland, but actually the numbers reducing is why I think Boston College has played a really important role in heightening and allowing for an understanding of not just what Ireland is, but why the Irish-American relationship works so well. I think it's also important, something Christian touched on as well, the kind of cultural sense of Ireland, that as we move forward and the numbers of Irish-born people living here get smaller and smaller and smaller, it's that global power of Irish culture becomes really important. You know, why does a sitcom comedy about 5 girls living in Derry during the Troubles become a huge hit in the US? Student after student texts me, oh, I love the Derry Girls. Are you Irish? No. Do you do Irish studies? No. I love the Derry Girls. That says something. I'm not sure what sometimes, but that idea of Sally Rooney as the author, Kneecap the film, whatever new manifestation of Irish culture has, it lands here. And that makes Ireland visible.
I might just comment on the point about our migrant community in Ireland, which has grown so substantially, particularly since 2004, in fact, since the enlargement to the EU, and a big influx of migrants to Ireland. That community is an increasingly diverse community. We also have a large refugee population as well. And much of that in recent years has been linked to the conflict in Ukraine. We've taken in nearly 112,000 Ukrainians since the outbreak of the conflict. And what's interesting about Ireland, particularly in a comparative European context, is migration hasn't been weaponized to the same extent as it has here in the United States or in many other European countries. So the far-right movement in Ireland remains quite small and electorally insignificant for the most part. And that's quite interesting. It probably is linked to the fact that we're we're on the Atlantic coast, you know, we're far away from some of those forces that have been weaponizing migration. We've had a reputation as being a welcoming country. But at the same time, I think it's very important that we not be complacent about the way in which migration is, to a certain extent, beginning to be weaponized in Ireland. And it's interesting today to see Conor McGregor being welcomed to the White House. And one of his statements in that press conference he's been doing has been about about migration in Ireland, weaponizing it effectively. So I think that's something that Ireland really does need to remain attentive to. And again, that's where something like Irish studies and what we study and research here in the United States linked to the US experience becomes instructive for places like Ireland and vice versa as well. And then on the immigrant question, I am an Irish immigrant now, which seems very odd to say, I must say. What's interesting about the migrant community from Ireland coming here these days is that it's much, much smaller in number, as Mike has pointed to. But it's a different type of migrant as well. So the migrant community that would have come from Ireland in the 1980s, for example, would have been coming and fulfilling certain roles within society, contributing to certain industries, construction industry probably in particular, but also healthcare, for example. It's a different type of migrant today. Most of us, I say us now, most of us who are coming now are coming out of choice. We're choosing to come to the United States. Whereas for previous generations, it wasn't a choice in the same way. It was an economic necessity because there weren't opportunities back home and there were opportunities here. So it's a different type of migrant living a different type of experience that impacts then on the wider Irish American community. And perhaps it impacts on some of what the wider Irish community prioritises and some of the causes that the Irish American community takes up. And it's also, I think, the case, as you've made, that the Irish American community here in the United States, because the numbers have been falling progressively over the last few decades, is becoming more generationally distant. And as Mike said, that leads to a distorted view of modern day contemporary Ireland today, which is much more diverse, much more secular, much more liberal, much more sort of culturally complex than we might otherwise assume. So this, I think, again, this is where Irish Studies in Boston College can play a role in terms of telling that story, which is interesting in its own right, but I think it's instructive for all of us who still love Ireland.
So maybe I'll pick up on that, because it's right there. Somebody who's directing Irish Studies, that we see is exactly our goal at the moment, is updating Irish Studies, updating notions here in America of Ireland, and updating the discipline, how it engages with these issues, which requires moving beyond. David, the provost, mentioned before how Irish Studies emerged here in Boston College out of history and literature. Now we realize we need other disciplines to explain things. I mean, we've always needed it, but clearly politics, which is where Mary comes in, but we need to engage with sociology. It's also important that there's other media of doing it. The fact that I see Sheila Gallagher here from arts, or Richard Carney here from philosophy, or Marcus Breen over there for communications. Other forms of explaining Ireland are needed in today's world, which is crucial. And also there's, as Mary hinted, there's also, we can say this openly at BC, there's also a moral statement here, in the sense of, with the big assault now on diversity and equality, that's where we can make a statement which shows that Ireland as a model has a lot to say, how a small country can accept so many migrants and can benefit from it. And it's not about losing Irish identity. On the contrary, one of the remarkable things for me, as somebody who's very interested in folklore and in traditions, is to see how people are adopting traditions and reworking through them. To see black speakers of Irish language is fantastic. People adopting Ukrainian speakers of Irish and see how that engages. This is all fantastic for us to see that, and to see all these new iterations as they happen makes it particularly exciting, particularly dynamic. And that's a great lesson here for America, at a time where America used to exactly symbolize that and seems to have forgotten its own heritage. And Ireland is there to remind people about the power of diversity and immigration, how it contributes to a society. That it's not a negative thing. At the time when we hear people supposedly eating cats and dogs, it doesn't work like that. It's very different. And Ireland is a great lesson from a small country which shows things can be different, exactly the time that we need that kind of lesson.
Christian, you want to add anything?
Sure, I could try to do that, I guess. I guess thinking of the push and pull of immigration and again what it does with families and relationships with people, And what you're all speaking of here is, forces where Irish society has changed, it's become more diverse, right? So that's where the challenge is. So you're beginning to speak of a Irishness, right? So, what would be sort of at the essence, right? If it's not, being born in a particular place or, from a family that you come out, can you really become Irish? That's one of the questions you're saying, right? Is the implicit question, can you really become Irish if you're not born in Ireland? Well, if you're born in Ireland, but of different stock, racial stock or cultural stock, right? And the question seems to be yes, right? There's a way in which, so that's a capacity question, right? So how does a culture have a capacity to include others who would be othered otherwise, right, into itself? So at what level then is that culture operating, right? And so there's cultural values there, and I think it's an ability of feeling, right? What keeps people together, or forces apart, is our feeling. So a capacity for a culture to embed its feelings in time and narrative, and in time and then in narrative and literature and arts. It's a capacity to stay with that, to absorb real pain and trauma in its culture instead of having it divide apart. And then it's a common understanding, something that's shared. So maybe the fact that you have immigrants who are coming from other parts into Ireland, you think about the assimilation experience that's happening in Ireland that may or may not be happening in this country or other countries. How can that work? I think another thing here is also scale too, right? Is that Ireland is smaller, right? So and the numbers of people and these kind of things that we're talking about of absorbing feelings or other people into one's social structure does take a bit of time, and it can only happen at a certain scale. And maybe the appeal of the Dairy Girls is precisely as Five Girls or something. You can watch it. It's a small drama, right? And it's the kind of thing that and All in the Family might have worked. With one family at that sort of level you see operating. When it becomes, and this is where I'm looking at Richard Carnegie, right, of this French stock, right? I mean, I was born an existentialist, okay, of this alienated self that has no relationship, and that's been a deep crisis in life that I've worked through, and it's part of the attraction as to why I work, in my librarian role with preserving and understanding and therefore preserving cultural materials that reflect these different cultures. So, I don't know, a little tidbits to think about.
I will also step in to pitch our upcoming event on your way out. If you'd like to take an event card, in April we will have a Flatley lecture with Emma Dabiri. Those of you may know her. She's a Black Irish writer. Her most famous work that you probably know is Don't Touch My Hair. So she'll be giving our Flatley lecture this year, and then the next day we are having a whole event on race in Ireland. So Emma Dabiri and 3 other speakers will be here, all to talk about their academic work relating to historical and contemporary and literary issues of race in Ireland. That's in April. Grab your programs on the door on your way out. We'll be back here in this room. We had to plug that. I also think, so we've mentioned we've covered immigration and emigration, this changing aspect of Ireland, and we unfortunately can't get out of this panel right without talking about Brexit and reunification. It's what every event we have, somebody wants to hear about. It's no matter where I go, if somebody mentions Ireland or I tell them that I study Ireland, it's the kind of question on the tip of their tongue, so we have to talk about it. And in the past couple of years, we've had many anniversaries, both the decade of centenaries, and then we've moved on to anniversaries of Northern Ireland, and these all have led to interesting conversations. So again, another 2-parter question for you. Where do you see the pillars of BC Irish programming, right, which is what I'm deeming all of you are one pillar of BC Irish programming? How do you see your programming interacting with issues of reconciliation, of reforming the Good Friday Agreement, of managing these Brexit-related issues? And then the obvious follow-up is a question on Irish unification, right? It seems, like I said, to be in every space, in every debate. So on the flip side of that, how do you feel that your pillars in BC can navigate issues around reunification and manage the Northern Irish, the Irish, and the Irish American perceptions and expectations of what possible unification could look like? Again, such a small question. Please answer in a timely manner and fashion.
Maybe I should start as well.
I started studying Brexit in 2015, which was the year when we became aware that there would be at some point a referendum on the UK EU membership. So I can't believe it's 10 years talking about Brexit. I kind of left Ireland so I could stop talking about it.
So sorry, Mary.
But yeah, I mean, Brexit, the legacy of Brexit continues to be felt. The one thing that Brexit did, if you can sort of distill it, the one thing that it did in Ireland is it got us talking about the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland again. And we had stopped talking about the border as an issue of contention in Irish politics after 1998, after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. Brexit brought all of that back onto the table in really, really contentious and difficult ways. It had a negative impact on unionist nationalist relationships in Northern Ireland. It had a negative impact on North-South relations on the island of Ireland, and had a negative impact on British-Irish relations. It probably did, at the same time, cement the Republic of Ireland's relationship with the European Union. So there's all these different types of relationships happening. We spent a long time working through it, and it got to a point where it is now effectively, it has stabilized. And then President Trump won the election here in the United States. And one of the things that President Trump is talking about is tariffs. And the problem with tariffs is that he's threatening tariffs, will likely impose tariffs on the European Union. But he may not do the same for the UK. And that means we have to start talking about the border yet again. And it will be hugely complex, and it will be hugely challenging to manage that conversation if it transpires in the way that he's setting it out at the moment. So Brexit sort of infused conversations will reignite again, I would imagine, in the next few months and next few years, if the US administration goes ahead with this sort of differentiated approach to tariffs vis-a-vis Europe and Britain. And again, I think Boston College is a place where we can bring these discussions to the fore. We can ask colleagues here in Boston College across the disciplines, as Guy said, to think about all of the challenges that this brings forth for the situation in Northern Ireland. And alongside all of that, what's happening in Northern Ireland as the peace process continues. The peace process wasn't a moment in time. It continues. There are some legacy issues that we're still working out, and the big one is reconciliation. Again, reconciliation is a very interesting theme in Northern Ireland, on the island of Ireland actually today. There's questions about what it is. What do we mean by reconciliation? There's questions to be asked about, do we need reconciliation in order to achieve a united Ireland? Some will say yes, and some will say no. There's a theological dimension to reconciliation as well, which again, Boston College, I think, is well placed to contribute to. So certainly from the Irish Institute's perspective and working with my colleagues here, we do hope to bring some key figures over here to talk about these themes and to try to do that not just in public settings with faculty and students, but to do it privately as well, as was the case during the peace process when Boston College played that kind of role, providing a space and an opportunity for people to really tease out these kinds of issues. Do you want me to talk about unification? Of course, that is the other impact of Brexit. It has meant we started talking about Irish unity in a way we just weren't talking about before 2015, 2016. And it does appear to have had an impact on how people feel about Irish unity, and it does appear to have had an impact on people's preference for Irish unity. That's what the opinion polling tells us. But it's a subtle shift. And it's a complicated shift as well, because it's conditional. So support for Irish unity, it might be something that most people in the Republic of Ireland aspire to, but when you start drilling down and asking questions about, well, are you happy for taxes to rise in order to support Irish unity? Are you happy for the Irish flag to be changed? Are you okay with the new anthem? What do we do with the two different military forces on the island of Ireland, and the different police forces on the island of Ireland? Once you start asking all of these questions, support for Irish unity does begin to diminish. And Northern Ireland, it's perhaps even more contested. Again, some subtle shifts in support for Irish unity, but certainly in Northern Ireland, there is not majority support for Irish unity. None of the polling has demonstrated that to date. That's not to say we won't get to a point in the next 5, 10 years, whatever the case may be. But for now, the Irish unity, the debate has started. There is no hard and fast preparation being made for Irish unity at the level of the state. But it's certainly something I think that we all should watch very closely. And again, I do think what happens here in the United States on the tariffs question will probably add further to the mix in terms of how, you know, Northern Ireland might be best placed to take advantage of the global economy in the event that these tariffs become hugely problematic and complex. So there's much to think about, and it's not just about tariffs, it's not just about economy, of course, it is about identity as well. And there will always be a constituency in Northern Ireland that will never want to see Irish unity. There will always be a constituency within unionism itself which will be opposed to it, and that's something we shouldn't forget or sideline either. So, yeah, I think that's probably as much as I can say.
Okay, as one of your pillars, Rachel, what did we do? Many of you may know that the Irish government had a programme called the Decade of Centenaries that ran from 2013 to 2023. And it was basically looking at the history of how the state came into being. And there was some very esteemed people involved right at the beginning who said, this has to be a story, not an island kind of winning its independence, but how the island changed. And that island, I-S-L-A-N-D. And therefore the history, and so Boston College had a very big project called Century Island, but the one thing we did throughout the whole project was told the story of Ulster and the North. That it was a story of Catholics and Protestants. It was an inclusive story. So I think we've done that, and I think in many ways Boston College at multiple levels, Boston College in Ireland as well, has contributed to narratives and stories about Irish history. Irish culture has been very positive. We then hit, I'm aware of time, the unity debate. I find it deeply problematic, the language that people in the Irish Republic use. Reunification. So you're saying that the natural state is we, the Irish, are the winners, and we want those 6 counties back. Which goes into another whole kind of story about Anglo-Irish relationships as well. The story should be about, or the question should be about, what is the shared future, not about reunification. I think it's loaded, and it doesn't speak to 650, 700,000 people who live mainly in Northern Ireland who consider themselves British. You can throw in the shorthand Protestant, etc., etc. That you cannot engineer a debate, and I do fear it's where it's going at the minute, that the Irish win, that they solve the long-term historical problem by winning back the North. And those people who do not subscribe to that will be brought in. They will be brought home, not their home, but they will be brought back into this natural island, okay? And I think the whole tenor of debate is slipping towards reunification being a win. I agree with you about the fact of cost, about new military systems, police systems, health systems, and so on. But I actually think what the Irish state needs to do, and be very mindful of, is you've got to act as a persuader to bring a large group of people into this potential new thing and convince them it is in their best interest. And you touched on it. I've had this conversation with people in Ireland. They're horrified when you say to them, you will have to get rid of your national anthem. You will have to get rid of your flag. Why? Why? It's the Irish flag, it's the Irish anthem. But those people are not. They will have to stand under a shared flag, a shared anthem, which means part of the process of reunification is 5 million Irish people are going to have to give something up as part of their identity. I think that's a real challenge.
It just dawned on me by chance, nothing to do with what we talked about, but if you're a pillar of Irish, there's something called Samson. There's something between Samson and pillars, isn't there? I've got to think of that couple of moments. But all right, so I want to actually go back to this moment for the decade of centenaries, if we can. I'm an historian. You see, you think by the debate that's happening as, future looking, right? Let's forget about the past and move on. We've been at those moments before as well, with the Good Friday Agreement at first, when the rhetoric was, look forward, don't look at the past. And that came back as a boomerang, because you cannot escape the past in Ireland. History and memory is always part of it. As an historian of memory and forgetting, which is what I am, I can see that Ireland plays such a central role in the debate. And even Look how we all heard here in the room that Ireland celebrated a decade of centenaries. We also kind of nodded around, it's fine. Isn't that abnormal? For a whole decade, it was actually 11 years. An Irish decade is never quite a decade, it's 11 years. It was started 2012, if you remember, and continued to 2023. For 11 years, people in Ireland were obsessed with memory and commemoration, right? COVID came in the middle, it kind of broke that obsession, but it's quite remarkable. And then think about it for a minute. Ireland, which we speak about all the time, is an abnormal country in the fact that it's a modern state, perhaps the only modern state, I'm talking about the Republic for the moment, that doesn't have an Independence Day. We're sitting here on St. Patrick's Day. This is not an Irish Independence Day. The fact that all Irish politicians are in America or in Australia or around the world says something as well. It doesn't usually happen in a country's Independence Day. People stay at home and celebrate Independence Day. It's actually a global kind of moment of Irishness, which is different from Independence Day. And the fact that there isn't an agreed date means that Ireland is a continual state of contestation, of thinking about the past and what it means. This leads to many different directions, and I can go on this for hours, so we won't take those at the moment. But also surprises come up. When people say you're going to have to do this, you're going to do that, and then the surprises happen. When people thought, well, we're going to work through all the past, then we can move forward in a progressive way. Well, first of all, as Mary mentioned, dealing with the past will always return. Whether it's in Northern Ireland or in other places, legacy issues and transitional justice will always return to trouble people who think they can steamroll and go forward without asking those questions. And that's crucial. And here I'm thinking exactly about Bernard Scott, Cueva and Gilbert, who's exactly engaging these debates of how we find a fair way of doing it and how we include it in what we do in academy. But also another point that Cueva brought to my attention. It's great we have Bernard Scholars here, by the way. People don't know what that is. BC has a privilege of inviting every semester somebody at the top of Irish studies, at the very top, to spend a residency here for a semester, sometimes for a year. And that really enriches our community. So Cueva from Sheffield is here this term, and in a fantastic line of people we've had throughout all these years. And one of the points that Cueva mentioned aside, we have great conversations around this, is people thought that the post-nationalists thought that the decade of centenary will put an end to all these kind of supposedly toxic questions of nationalism. Actually, the decade of centenary might have actually introduced a hyper-nationalism, coming as a grassroots notion, exactly from the youth, not what the elder generation expected. So surprises happen in these contexts. We have to see how that happens, because these are factors that change things as they happen. And as academics, we can take stock of it and engage with it and try and keep our hand on the pulse, but we never predict what's going to happen. We never have prescriptions. And it's good that we don't have prescriptions, because we're just a small factor in a much larger game.
So, aware enough time, I want to kind of maybe move on to a conversation of the future and the past into soft power. Again, harkening back to Mike's brilliant lecture today. How do you feel that BC has, in the past, and we're still going to talk about the past and the future, how do you feel that BC has done kind of disseminating Irish culture? Where do you think that we're succeeding, and where could we be doing better? Again, in your respective pillars, I'm just going to keep calling you, because that's a metaphor that I'm running with until you're going to have to beat it out of me. But yeah, how do you think that each of kind of your individual programs has been succeeding in kind of disseminating Irish culture, and what could we be doing better?
Maybe first, Chris. Yeah. Bernard's way.
Okay, I think so. Maybe we can volley this back and forth with a question. So, Rachel, what you disseminating? I don't actually see this. I'll be a little provocative, okay, in a very friendly way. As my role in Burns Library, I see more as a collecting and preserving. Yes, there's a bringing back, a disseminating, but I don't see it as my responsibility of the libraries of BC's to say, this is Irish culture and we need to, to disseminate it or, even interpret it in a particular way. I think interpretation or criticism from the disciplines of, history or literary criticism to do rigorous work or philosophy or aesthetic criticism, yes, bringing those tools to it, but I don't see it as disseminating. Why did you choose disseminating?
I chose disseminating based off of Mike's lecture today, as I thought it was an interesting conversation about the Irish culture. And I agree with you. I think that maybe as a librarian you don't disseminate, but I think there's something about the dissemination of knowledge though that you would provide our graduate students and the students here. So there's a sort of, yes, you are physically not disseminating Irish culture because you're hoarding it instead in the basements of the Burns, as you should be. But I think there's a dissemination of cultural knowledge that you play a part in.
So how do you do it, Rachel? Talk about your work as you're a postdoc now, a graduate of this program. So because you feel a passion about this, I can see this in a teaching role, in a research role, and you feel a burden to do this, right?
I do feel a burden to do this, which I think I will say, like, I'm many people up here on the panel, I'm not Irish. I have no Irish ancestry, which boggles the mind of both Irish customs when I tell them I'm there for a research trip, and both every older person I meet in Southie is completely mind-boggled by the fact that I have no Irish ancestry and I study Irish studies. But it's important to me, and I think important to the other graduate students in the room who dedicate their careers to this, the importance of having an event like this where, well, one, there's a payoff, right? At the end of the day, it's very nice to hear that 25 years ago, Guy and Mary, you were graduate students and there's light at the end of the tunnel. And there might be a continuation future where we continue to disseminate Irish culture. But do it through my research, through my teaching here at BC, in a way that is enhanced by each of your programs, right? Each of your programs as a student, as a postdoc, has been wildly beneficial for me. And I, as a graduate of the program, would not have been able to accomplish my research or my teaching or really the passion that I have for the subject without each of the kind of institutes that you all represent.
Can I also, for a minute, just point out, that's why I don't like actually the word pillars, because BC has Irishness all around it, and many other agents, maybe agents is a good word as well, multiple agents, which as we bring into the game, I'd like just to acknowledge, and maybe they could each say a word. I would like to hear a bit from Nancy and the McMullen Museum, the exhibitions that you put on, and also from Sheila Fos-Cohen and the Gaelic Roots program, which fills this house every month with people coming to listen to traditional music. So maybe Nancy, you could say a few words of the kind of exhibitions that have gone through the years. Would you like to say something? Please. Nancy, let's.
I was really pleased to be able to be staring here, thanks to my colleague Christian Dupont, at 6 of the catalogs that we produced since our opening of the McMullen Museum. And for those of you who weren't here in 1993, I will let you know. I may be the only one who was here in 1993. Oh, Richard was here. We opened with Irish watercolors and drawings from the National Gallery of Ireland. And I had it in my head that we should do this. And I went to Father Monin at the time and said, this is what I think we should do. This was a brand new museum. We had never had international loans here. And I said, it's going to be expensive, but I will work with Ireland. And I worked with Vera Kryelkamp, who's still here, and with Adele Dalsimer and with Kevin O'Neill to persuade the National Gallery of Ireland to lend to us. And it was an enormous success. And after that, there were about 8 or 9 other exhibitions that we did. And we really brought Irish art certainly to the Northeast, and one might argue to the United States. And with a lot of the catalogs that we did, we were able to enhance the scholarship of Irish art in a way that was very well received by our colleagues in the universities and the museums in Ireland. And we're going to continue that in the next few years. Marjorie House is now working with Christian and Diana Larson to put together a show on the Yates family, which will open in January of 2026. And Rob Savage is working on an exhibition on the Troubles. So I'm glad we were able to talk a bit about the Troubles. So we will be, in fact, a public space for dialogue about that issue.
Thank you, John. We'll hear a quick word from Sheila, please.
Sheila, thank you so much.
Thanks, Guy. My name is Sheila Falls Keohan, and I direct the Gaelic Roots series here. It started in 1990 to promote the Irish culture of music, song, and dance that is so strong in the Boston area and the surrounding New England area. And we host musicians from Ireland that come here and give beautiful concerts and fill the Conley House with students and people from the surrounding communities. And so I teach Irish fiddle here, and so my students are lucky enough to hear the music that is shared here in Conley House. And we have a big ceilidh that happens every year, and that will happen at the end of March in Gaston Hall. So put your dancing shoes on and come. Thank you.
Sorry, just one thing as well. We talk about dissemination and culture. I do have one of the best jobs in the world. I always explain to people that most students, when they come to Ireland, they are studying, but in their head they're on holiday. So they're all in a good mood. And you have to understand that for Boston College now through Jim and the Office of Global Engagement, probably across the year and the different groups we receive, I'd say more BC students come to Ireland during the academic year than pretty much anywhere else. So what's my job? Is to disseminate, or what word you used? We're agents or whatever, of Irish culture, that you, even as students, they arrive with a perception of what Ireland is. And it's actually giving them that. It might be taking them to a ceilidh or some traditional music, or taking them to an art gallery in Dublin, but it's also opening their eyes up to that contemporary Dublin, that new Ireland. And I do think that's one thing that we are brilliant at, to slap our own backs, is actually teaching our students and taking them through what it is to be Irish, to understand Ireland, to understand Irish America. And through that you are introducing them to the culture, which is the literature, past and present, the art and so on. And I think the student body and the student experience over the 50 odd years since Irish Studies was established has been absolutely critical as a part of the sort of the experience of students on this campus.
And I'll add, if I can, with the student experience, the great thing for us in Irish Studies is we can pick up on all this energy. That students who come back from Ireland enthused and want to study afterwards courses can take a variety of different courses. And students who like Irish music can now take Irish music courses and then come to Gaelic Roots concerts. Or the museum's a research museum, and we use it as a research museum. All these things are tied together in a wonderful way, and it's particularly evident in our graduate community. It's great to see some of our graduate students here today, really at the cutting edge of Irish studies and reshaping the discipline. And there's a community of graduate students here, which is remarkable, at Connolly House, who meet. So we also have this kind of Irish sense of community as a microcosmos here, working through it, together with faculty. So in this sense, the notion of multiple agency really comes to place, where they can, through the Irish Institute, can meet visiting politicians. Through the museum, they can see the very best of art in their very different forms. Through the library, we have the best resources to offer bibliographically. And at the same time, we also have great connections with Irish universities. We have exchange programs with Queen's University, for example, or with Trinity College Dublin. Jim hosted a very big event with a delegation coming here, and every year we go over there. And that is part of the relationship.
So, Jim Keenan with Global Engagement. But I'd like to make an observation. Like, sometimes I think when I can think of like Chris Young talking about hosting collections from other museums here at DC, or Marjorie talking about culture, or Guy talking about it. But there's also another level of collaboration that goes on. And so that could be like your work, Michael Norton's work, with the All Island Cancer Research Institute, in which you're working with all these Irish scholars, but on cancer research. It's not about Ireland, but it is about cancer research. Or I could go through Teresa Betancourt on forced migration and her role with forced migration in Ireland. Or I could talk about 16 other faculty who are already doing joint work with Irish scholars. But it's not about Ireland, and it's not about the United States. It's a new partnering. And so I'd like to just remind us that in order to talk about the partnering, we don't have to talk about things in Ireland or things, but as a matter of fact, the way we do collaborate, when you were talking about multiple agency, we have to explore this so that we're not just talking about the green and the other important issues, but what is it that allows for such frequent collaboration between these two cultures in which we're looking at things that are global rather than our own regional interests.
So I first off, I'm happy to take suggestions on the metaphor. I've been trying to work on a metaphor for a really long time. Agents of, I'm just gonna call them agents of chaos. This is kind of what I hear, which would also I feel be very adept for our program. But I'm happy to take critiques on the metaphor. So if you have any idea on how to make a better one, please throw them my way. And I think that maybe this point of shifting perspectives moving forward is the question that I want to end on, because I think it's a good place to leave everyone before we kind of break off into our reception. And I want to ask maybe each of you up here to reflect on Irish studies as a field of study and maybe speak about how BC seeks to expand what we would consider maybe the traditional reach of Irish studies and to include other disciplines from the arts and social sciences, or really just kind of ask you to reflect on how you think we can make progress moving forward.
You're head of Irish studies.
Well, our role beyond anything else is to update our studies, but I'd say something else worth thinking of. In many ways, Irish studies, as I see it as an historian, is one of the cradles, Irish studies BC, one of the cradles of Irish studies in general. People think Irish studies was invented in Ireland. Not quite so. Richard might we could have a debate about this one, because Richard was there at the beginning of Irish studies. Edited a journal which is pivotal for Irish studies. And Richard has just won the Irish Research Medal and was awarded from the Taoiseach just this week. It's a privilege to have such a sterling collection of faculty across here, and some of them identified with Irish studies and some with an interest, like Mike Naughton, who comes over and brings it not under the Irish flag, which is remarkable, as Jim eloquently expressed. But I'd like to point out that Irish studies, and the way we understand it today, and the way it was born here at BC, out of this amalgamation or coming together of literature and history. And that's the model which is across what's called the American Conference of Irish Studies today, ACIS. It's a model around the world. But we also have a role now to update it, to change it. And so it's an experiment which is happening as we see it now. In many ways I can see how I'd like to see it happen, but actually I'm not the one who's going to decide. It's the grad students who are going to decide. They're going to take Irish studies in new directions and raise new questions which we can't even think about at the moment, but they're developing it here, and it's a privilege at BC to be here to give a bit of inspiration, challenge, maybe to challenge, be thought-provoking is my main role, I think, in Irish studies here, to allow people to take Irish studies in new directions, which will match where Ireland is going, but also give new horizons for people to think in Ireland differently, because we can see things differently across the Atlantic, and that, I think, is our main role over here.
Yeah, I mean, my answer to the question would be that, in a way, moving forward, we do have to enlarge what we mean by Irish studies. David doesn't disagree with me because it costs money. But I think every school on this campus should have an Irish-related person. And I mean that in the sense of studying Irish, but also Jim's wider connection point of view. If I look at the Carroll School of Management, we have very smart people studying global business, and yet they don't have somebody who studies US-Irish relations, when 75% of the entire Irish GDP is based around American corporations being located and headquartered in Ireland. Why don't we have that person? And it seems to me that if you're going to grow the program, it doesn't all have to be contemporary, but you have to almost start looking strategically. We have this amazing thing called Irish Studies and Boston College in Ireland. If this is a focus, then how do we grow it so it's just ingrained in every corner of the university? So I always say, not everybody in the university is going to use Boston College Ireland. It's a great facility. My colleagues there in Roisin here are brilliant. They're fantastic. They can explain it to you. But I think everybody in the university should be having a discussion. What can we do with Ireland? And their answer might be not. But when they know the rich resources we have here on campus and in Ireland, they should be asking the question.
Just very, very briefly, really. Just turn that on. You hear me?
Try the other one.
Battery's going. Yeah, no, I just echo all of that, and I just give a shout out to my political science colleagues, some of whom are here this evening. And political science has never really been a part of the Irish Studies community. And again, just speaking to Mike's point about the way in which there's a richness to political science and the study of Ireland and politics in Ireland, which I think has resonance far beyond Ireland. So it's a real privilege for me to be in the political science faculty and to be able to bring some of that to bear. But to take it beyond that and share it with the wider political science community. You know, some of those themes like around the weaponization or non-weaponization of the far right in Ireland is something that I think we can all learn from. And there's other things that Mike has spoken to as well. So for me, I think it's important that we find a way of positioning political science within the broader Irish Studies community and give it a greater presence at, you know, the Conference of Irish Studies every year. And what I love about Boston College, having only come here 6 months ago, is it speaks to Mike's point as well. Like, Ireland is everywhere. You don't feel lonely here in Boston College, and you don't feel homesick, because Ireland is everywhere. It's the names of the buildings, it's the McMullen Museum, it's the Burns Library, it's colleagues in the room, and even some of the students. I came from University College Cork. I had a student from University College Cork in my class this year here in BC. So it's everywhere, and BC honours that in a really wonderful way. And it does that by remaining true to its roots, which, as the Provost spoke about, are grounded in 1863, providing an education for the young men of Irish immigrants escaping the famine. So BC has really positioned itself in a place where, you know, it has integrity in this space, and it has credibility in this space, and it has enormous potential, as I see it, to develop that. And I suppose my appointment as a political scientist within the broader Irish Studies field is a symbol of that. And I'd love to have another few Irish political scientists in the room with me. So, but beyond that as well, speaking to Jim's point, and touching on what Mike has said as well.
That's the one thing you haven't learned here yet, Mary, is really quickly. And you can't point the microphone at the amplifier. But how long have you been here again? You said 6 months. I think, Mary, you said everything, because I guess it's sort of falling to me maybe to be a penultimate wrap-up. Maybe we'll go back to Rachael on this here. But meaning the same thing that I was wanting to say. And I've been here only 10 years, and I was going to say that I've been only 10 years here. And that is that this is to the students in the room, including our BC companions. I'm looking at Jack here, right? Executive, people who are coming back as students later in life. This is a remarkably special place. Many of us have worked at the university in college, right? And I think we find our places here at BC, and we tend to stick around, right? And there's a lot that keeps us here. And it's this combination. It's built on traditions of things, right? And it was a combination that was set up earlier, right? The academic programs, right? David generously referred to the building of library collections. There were many, it's been a century that we've been at this collecting. That's, and I get to build on that, right? And the same thing with the museum, long traditions that you have instituted, Nancy, with your, as a founding director of the McMullen Museum and bringing forward with your colleagues. That's remarkable, bringing back the Irish Institute, from losing our dear friend Bob Morrow, who many in our room here will remember, and that was important, and others who came before. And we were talking about, Mike earlier, well, why did Boston College, purchase the building there on Stevens Green, the first and still really only investment of property outside of Chestnut Hill here, right? Or not Chestnut Hill, Brookline, Newton, okay? Right? I think I'm saying that correctly. Why? What was happening? Well, it was because of the Irish Institute again, and having that place in Dublin. But that was a very good investment. Now we can turn it in different ways. But this kind of combination, this was behind the vision, David, right, of the Center for Irish Programs, and whether you call it a center or not, but this idea of just bringing us together across these disciplines and just across. And the other aspect, and this is a question again for students, ask yourself, why did you come to Boston College, and do you feel like you've come to the right place? And I'm looking at Father Jim Keenan and others in the room here, right? That there's something special that's just besides the Irishness, and that is that Jesuit Catholic spirituality, nation tradition that's a part of this, which is deep in Ireland as well. And Belvedere College, you open up the Irish Times today, and there's some not so nice things there, okay? But again, part of a culture, part of a history we need to deal with, to integrate. But that's another really important part about Boston College. This is a remarkable place, and I feel it draws investment, from me into this, and I think we all sort of feel that. And so it's wonderful to be a colleague of yours. Good. Back to you, Rachel.
I think that we can safely say that it's been an exciting 25 years, and we all look forward to the next 25 years.